The Cross and the Crown. When you think of saying to God that you are ready to accept your cross, is there a sense of hesitation? Does the thought come to mind, what if God requires of me more than I am able to give? You are not alone in the way you feel. In fact, one study group reported that rather than go ahead to work on this lesson, they chose to go back and redo in His presence. All of them shared apprehension in approaching this lesson. One person worried that perhaps she would have to leave her home and family and become a missionary in Africa. She said this only half in jest, but it expressed a very genuine concern that many of us have when we contemplate the idea of the cross. The members of this group felt that the cross represented suffering and had an image of a God who meted out suffering and punishment to His children to test their love. This group found that they had built a resistance to this lesson for fear of the burdens that would be laid upon them. Resistance to this chapter was so strong that even after they had gone through the entire lesson, they found they could not remember what was in it. Fortunately, these individuals were able to see what was happening and decided to go back over the lesson a second time. This time, they came to the realization that the cross did not represent an arbitrary amount of suffering they had to pay as the toll into the kingdom of heaven, but instead the direct result of previous errors which they were choosing to rectify in this lifetime. The cross, then, represents the errors which we have engaged in and that separate us from a sense of oneness with God. In one reading, it was suggested that the cross Christ bore can be an archetype for each of us in overcoming our own karmic debts. He was the Son, made the Son, those of the sons that went astray, and through the varying activities overcame the world through the experiences, bearing the cross in each and every experience, reaching the final cross with all power, all knowledge, in having overcome the world, and of himself accepted the cross, hence doing away with that often termed karma that must be met by all. With the idea in mind that the cross is symbolic of our experience in materiality, let us examine it as a symbol. This ancient symbolic image predates the birth of Christ. Violet Shelley, in her book Symbols and the Self, states there are hundreds and hundreds of kinds of crosses, but in all its forms, the cross shows the descent of spirit into matter. She relates the cross to the number 4, and says the number 4 expresses the quaternary, the 4 planes of nature on which the incarnated God is crucified. We are all crucified in the flesh by our descent into the material plane. Thus, if the cross shows us diagrammatically this descent of spirit into matter, it also shows us the way out, by causing the spirit to ascend. Let's look at another helpful resource in exploring this symbol of crucifixion. In Gaskell's Dictionary of All Scriptures and Myths, we find definitions of the crucifixion according to different sources. According to the Manichaeans, it is a symbol of the divine sacrifice, that is, the voluntary limitations taken on by divine energies as they moved into matter. The crucifixion of Jesus, according to the Gospels, is a symbol of the final anguish of the incarnate soul as it reaches perfection, and the lower nature drops away from it. While there is an ultimate falling away of the lower nature and triumph of the higher, there seems to be the continual challenge of overcoming the temptations of the material world. Does the image of the crucifixion speak to us of pain alone? Does bearing our own crosses have to be a joyless thing? Not at all. Consider a time when outside situations in your life were oppressive. Some people have said that it was at those times they really had the incentive to turn and seek solace in the living presence of the God within. In seeking, they entered into a deep communion which rendered all the ordeals tolerable. As stated by one Casey reading on The Cross and the Crown, then the first of the signs that may be given to as many as have met the cross, as have endured, is given that which enables them, in whatsoever state they find themselves in meeting their crosses, to do so in the joy of the Lord. Happiness and joy go hand in hand. He that overcomes, then, is joyous in the knowledge that power to meet, power to use, power to overcome is given in his understanding. In Return from Tomorrow, a book by Dr. George Ritchie, an interesting example is presented. Dr. Ritchie found himself working with a prisoner from a German concentration camp. Strong and tireless, the man worked endlessly long days without any diminishing of his energy. Dr. Ritchie felt the man must have only spent a short time in one of the less oppressive camps, only to find out that the man had spent years in the very worst camp of all. More remarkable still was his story. The Germans had come to his home and taken him, his wife, and children, and lined them up against the wall to execute them. His life was spared only when they discovered his usefulness as an interpreter. He was faced with a terrible crisis, which became the pivotal point in his life. Should he give in to hate and allow it to rule his life? He realized, however, that hatred was what had just taken from him the most important things in his life, and so he chose to give himself over to love instead. It was love that gave him vitality and inspired him to work 16-hour days, always finding just a little more time to help someone in need. Here is an example of one man faced with an awesome cross, but who was able not only to endure, but also abide in the consciousness of the Christ, who eased his burden. His life is a beautiful illustration of following this principle from the readings. So must the central theme, the basis of each individual's approach be, not "what is my cross?" which is the usual first question in every material mind, but rather, how may I, with his aid, best meet my cross in my approach to the crown of righteousness? In meeting and overcoming our cross comes the promise of the glory of the crown to those who are faithful. The promise is made this way: "Ye shall enter into the joys of the Lord," enjoying that crown that brings joy, happiness, harmony, peace, for he is the Prince of Peace. Why is the symbol of the crown chosen to represent the reward of our overcoming? We know that the crown has been used throughout the ages to represent that which is revered and of high stature. In Gaskell's Dictionary of All Scriptures and Myths, the crown is a symbol of supremacy over the lower nature, and also an emblem of kingship through the power of wisdom and the higher emotions. A Jewish book of wisdom, the Zohar, refers to Kether, or the crown, as the principle of all principles, the secret wisdom, the most exalted crown with which all crown and diadems are adorned. In addition, there is a beautiful passage in Isaiah chapter 28 that states, "In that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown of glory, and for a diadem of beauty unto the residue of his people." Is it possible that there is a greater depth to its meaning than just a fitting emblem? In one reading, Casey states, "The pattern in the mount is represented in the body through that shown in the glorification in the mount, as seen upon transfiguration, showing the specific reference as to the cross and the crown. It was upon Mount Golgotha that Jesus was crucified and received his crown of glory. It is interesting to note that Golgotha means the skull, or place of the skull. Millard Fillmore, in his Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, explains, "It is here in the Holy Mount that spirit attains its ascendancy. Human will gives over to divine will." Symbolically, the skull could be considered the top of the mountain, and it is here, we are told, that a dynamic transformation takes place. In the head resides what is known as the crown chakra, or highest spiritual center. The chakras, or 7 major endocrine centers of the body, are the channels of spiritual forces, with the crown center relating to the highest order of spiritual awakening. Ledbetter, in his book on chakras, gives us insight into the mystical significance behind the symbol of the crown. In writing about this spiritual center, he states, "This chakra is usually the last to be awakened. In the beginning, it is the same size as the others, but as the man progresses on the path of spiritual advancement, it increases steadily until it covers about the whole top of the head. Another peculiarity attends its development. It is at first a depression in the etheric body, as are all the others, because through it, as through them, the divine force flows in from without. But when the man realizes his position as a king of the divine light, dispensing largesse to all around him, this chakra reverses itself, turning as it were inside out. It is no longer a depression, but a prominence, standing out from the head as a dome, a veritable crown of glory. In the highly developed man, this coronal chakra pours out a splendor and glory which makes for him a veritable crown. And all that he has gained, all the magnificent karma that he makes, all the wondrous spiritual force that he generates, all that he casts perpetually at the feet of the Logos to be used in his work." Throughout the ages, the saints have been pictured wearing these beautiful auras of beauty that represent the awakened crown chakra. The concept of service, as related to this lesson, is explained in this reading on the cross and the crown. "With joy, then, do such individuals enter into the service that may be their part, their portion, as the channels, the ways in which they may serve, in the making known to others the way of the cross, and the crown of glory that comes with same, in the knowledge of the life being spent in a way that he would have one go, for his presence then abides ever." As glorious as this activity of the crown chakra may be, there is even greater glory that attends its development. Remember the promise. With the full taking up of the cross comes the attainment of the crown and the release from the law of karma. The resurrection shows to us the result of this attainment, the overcoming of death itself. In fact, overcoming of death is the final and last cross, the total overcoming of materiality. Let us go back and look at the Casey readings in this regard. Remember the pattern in the mount, in self, in the physical body, in the mental body, in the spiritual body. That is the mount. So long as there is perfect coordination in the mount, all things work together for the good of the mount. When there is the rebellion in the mount, then there is disconnection, destruction. Hence death in the physical ensues. The same theme found in this Casey reading can be found in the philosophies and traditions of India. Here, where deep meditation is a common spiritual practice, the technique of overcoming death through the conscious leaving the physical body is not unheard of. In the autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda describes one such instance. He met with an old friend named Sanandan. Sorrowfully, his friend told him, "My adorable guru is gone," and proceeded to tell the following story of his death. He proposed one day to feed a huge crowd from Rishikesh. I inquired why he wanted such a large number. "This is my last festival ceremony," he said. I did not understand the full implications of his words. My guru helped with the cooking of great amounts of food. After the feast, he sat on a high platform and gave an inspired sermon on the infinite. At the end, before the gaze of thousands, he turned to me, as I sat beside him on the dais, and spoke with unusual force. "Sanandan, be prepared. I am going to kick the frame." After a stunned silence, I cried loudly, "Master, don't do it!" He smiled at me, but his eyes were already beholding eternity. "Be not selfish," he said, "nor grieve for me. I have been long cheerfully serving you all. Now rejoice and wish me Godspeed. I have got to meet my cosmic beloved. He cried again, Sanandan, here I kick the frame by the second Kriya Yoga. He looked at the sea of faces before us and gave a blessing. Directing his gaze inward to the spiritual eye, he became immobile. While the bewildered crowd thought he was meditating in an ecstatic state, he had already left the tabernacle of flesh and had plunged his soul into the cosmic vastness. Yogananda explains that the second Kriya technique of yoga enables the devotee who has mastered it to leave and return to the body consciously at any time. Advanced yogis use the second Kriya technique during the last exit of death, a moment they invariably know beforehand. In closing, let's hold in mind the greater promise found in the Casey readings. In the way of the cross is light. Though it may have its crown of thorns, it has also its glory that passeth understanding in the finite mind. Yet, as the infinite opens the way, the thorns become less, and the way the brighter.